Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello and welcome to the London section of the show. I'm Sean Lowe. Coming up later, a report suggests poverty in outer London is rising. The capital has 1/4 of the nation's wealth. Why have its suburbs been overlooked? With me throughout the programme, Dawn Butler, the Labour MP for Brent Central, and Paul Scully, the Conservative MP for Sutton and Cheam. Welcome to you both. Dawn, first of all, we now know there is going to be another Labour leadership contest. Angela Eagle's thrown her hat in the wind. Are you going to nominate Jeremy Corbyn again this time?
I think that what I want to do tomorrow is have a discussion with everybody to see where we're at and what's happening. I'm really disappointed in how all this has come about. I don't think there should have ever been a vote of no confidence. I think if this is what Angela wanted to do, then she should have done this straight away. You know, we had a procedure, we have a policy within the Labour Party, and she should have just said, OK, I want to challenge Jeremy. What's important to me is where our Labour Party is going, what our policies are and the direction of travel.
The criticism is it's going nowhere under the current leadership.
Well, I think that is wrong, because I have no problems with the stance that Jeremy has taken in his policies. I think we've had lots of wins in the Labour Party against the Tory government.
OK, so you will nominate him again?
I don't know what
I mean, you're not very impressed by Angela Eagle's actions, you said.
No, I'm not impressed by Angela Eagle's action. And actually, I don't know if I want to nominate anyone, because I'm really still quite annoyed that we find ourselves in this position when we shouldn't have been, and we should have just been united.
Although you heard her talking to Angela a little earlier, you may not have heard this, she said there's a reason for it. She said you can't leave behind an office door, and that's why she thinks there's a problem, and that's what she thinks Jeremy Corbyn is doing.
Yeah, but then we have that. Then when we have a mature debate, where, you know, we're elected politicians, we have a mature debate. For me and for the people who really need a Labour Party and actually really need a Labour government, is what are we doing? Where are we going? What's our policy direction? We're not a personality-led organisation. We should be a policy-led organisation, and that's what's important.
Well, that's the debate that Paul Scully, your party, is having at the moment. You backed Leave in the EU referendum, but you're backing a woman who supported Remain, Theresa May. I don't know if you heard him this morning, but Aaron Banks, the UKIP donor, said, you know, she is not going to deliver what you wanted. He believes, as a fellow outer, that Theresa May will simply come up with some kind of fudge that will disappoint the Leave campaigners.
Well, I went into the second ballot actually trying to give, I originally thought I was going to give the members who have the final say the best selection of two. I think Theresa was nailed on as one of those finalists. But in the end, when I looked at the three candidates, I just couldn't look beyond Theresa's experience, the need for stability, the need to actually continue to govern the country.
Are you not worried that she will do that, though?
No,
so
because
she will
actually,
be the fudge candidate
well, one of
the
first things I did when I heard Theresa's launch speech that Chris Grayling was leading her campaign, I went to Chris. He's my neighbouring MP. He's a fellow Leaver, and I wanted to get some reassurance. Why had he made that decision? And he reassured me. And since then, I've seen that David Davis is backing her, Priti Patel is backing her, Liam Fox is backing her as well.
All people who voted out.
There are significant senior Leavers that are there that are going to, you know, make sure that Brexit means Brexit.
This is an unprecedented situation. Not only will the next leader of the Labour Party be once again ultimately determined by the members, depending, of course, whether Jeremy Corbyn gets on the ballot paper, whether he gets that chance again. But on the Conservative side, 150,000 people will determine not just the leader of the Conservative Party, but our next Prime Minister. Most of them will never have even been in a room with Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom. That's a rather perverse situation, isn't it?
No, I think this is the... you know, we've had this one-man, one-vote system for a number of years. You're absolutely right that for the first time in 20 years or so, we're not just picking a party leader who we hope will be able to be Prime Minister. We're picking someone who is going to be Prime Minister, who's going to be stepping in into number 10, which is a big responsibility. And that's why, as I say, when I made my choice in the ballot, I couldn't go beyond Theresa, who's been there around the cabinet table, who I think will be able to drive firm negotiations in terms of Brexit. But you know what? It's not all about Brexit, although that's the thing we're all talking about. We've still got a government to run in terms of schools, in terms of hospitals, policing, and all
we're
these
gonna,
other areas.
we're going to stay with the subject of Brexit because the political fallout from that referendum is continuing. Mayor Khan this week warned that Brexit is going to put the battle against air pollution in the capital at risk, with potentially life-threatening implications for Londoners. So what should we be doing to prevent it? Raphael Sheridan has more.
It's claimed the capital's dirty air causes around 9,500 premature deaths every year. This week, the Mayor Sadiq Khan unveiled his plans to tackle the problem. It includes extending the size of the ultra-low emission zone to everything within the north and south circulars and bringing its introduction forward to 2019. Drivers of the most polluting vehicles will have to pay up to £100 to drive in it, depending on the size of the engine. And in the interim, from next year there'll also be a new additional £10 charge on the most polluting vehicles that are over 10 years old driving into central London. He called on the government to be bold.
The national government needs to be brave as well. There needs to be a new National Clean Air Act. There needs to be a diesel scrappage scheme. The government needs to ensure that London is around the table when it comes to deal with Brussels.
According to the Mayor, our decision to leave the European Union may also have an impact. Our air quality was governed by EU law, and in the future this may not apply. And according to Clean Earth, the government will not apply the same rigorous standards after Brexit.
The government hates the EU Ambient Air Quality Directive. They've been fighting tooth and nail against Clean Earth in the courts for the last 5 years. They've been lobbying in Brussels to try and weaken it. So you can bet the first opportunity they get to scrap it, they will take it. So I think that's why we're calling for a Clean Air Act. 60 years after the Clean Air Act 1956, we need a new Clean Air Act which really enshrines these rights that we had benefit from EU law into our domestic legislation.
It remains to be seen what impact the decision to leave the European Union will have, but it is clear that this is an issue of life and death.
Paul Scully, do you think it's time for a National Clean Air Act again?
I think there's something we've absolutely got to work together on. I know, looking at Zach Goldsmith's manifesto, Sadiq Khan's manifesto in terms of clean air, there were actually a lot of similarities, which we're now seeing in terms of the consultation that Sadiq has put out there.
But if national government is kicking against what the EU has set as the limits, and indeed the Supreme Court ruling last year said that UK limits in many areas exceeded what the EU had said, and we leave the EU, as we're going to do, isn't there a danger that pressure will disappear and that national government will lose interest?
No, I don't think there is, because I think, well, first of all, in terms of those areas that you were saying were quite high, there's one in my neighbouring constituency, in the borough of Wallington. It's got one of the highest, I think it's the 17th highest street in terms of pollutants in London. So it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we hold the government, their feet to the fire, the democratically elected government, and all we're talking about
And you'd like them
Brexit
to maintain
is bringing
those
control back
standards,
here.
would you?
Absolutely,
Right.
because London is somewhere where Londoners in particular will suffer as a result of high pollution.
But the government have not taken it seriously enough. I mean, they were supposed to meet certain targets by this year, 2016. They had said to the courts they're not going to meet those targets until 2030. When they were taken to court, they then reduced that to 2025. And in my constituency in Brent, we are 85% over the EU limits in some areas. And it is a matter of life and death, with 10,000 people, almost 10,000 people dying every year because of poor air quality.
Is it then, Dawn Butler, enough for the Mayor to simply say, I'm going to accelerate the ultra-low emission zone by a year? I mean, that's an inadequate response, isn't it, if the scale of the problem is that threatening? He promised to keep Londoners safe. As you say, nearly 10,000 of us are dying prematurely every year because the air we're breathing is not safe.
Well, if it was just that in isolation, then it would be inadequate response. But seeing as it's just one of many measures, I don't think it's an inadequate response. So everything in regards to the diesel scrappage scheme, for instance, which was never...
Unfortunately, that'll be a national thing. He doesn't have the power to do that.
Right, but he's fighting to get an agreement, and he said he will accelerate. The Mayor has said he will accelerate the diesel scrappage scheme, and he has got a commitment from the government able to do that. And also, in regards to buses and making sure, sort of retrospectively fitting them to make sure that they are less pollutant to the air.
Because unfortunately, all our
things
buses
are
at the moment
important.
are diesel, and diesel is the big problem here, we're
Even
told.
the new buses.
And even the new buses,
That's what I'm
ironically.
thinking, yeah.
But Paul Scully, there's an economic problem here, isn't there? I mean, there was some statistic that City Hall put out last autumn. I think 98% of the kilometres that are driven by vans in London are driven by diesel vans. So all those working people who come into London, whether they're delivery workers or doing service work in central London, coming from your borough, maybe coming from Brent as well, they're contributing to this. If you penalise those people, it has an economic impact.
Well, this is why the consultation is going to be really important, to actually exactly understand how that's going to affect business. Because what happened over a number of years, people were actually encouraged, don't forget that, not that long ago, to actually buy diesel because it was seen as the more environmentally
cleaner alternative. Yeah.
And then, so if you just look at black cabs, for example, how they have to go through a number of hoops and then keep having to invest 30, 40, 50,000 pounds in order to keep up with the latest legislation. We do have to bear that in mind. On the other hand, you can't compromise on air quality because, as Dawn said, it does affect people's lives.
OK. We'll come back in a moment, but it was striking that in the Europe referendum, we talked a bit about inner and outer London, whilst inner London voted Remain, 5 of the outer boroughs wanted out. Could that have anything to do with the problems identified in the suburbs by a new report? The Smith Institute, a Labour-leaning think tank, suggests poverty is now greater in outer London than it is in the centre. Job creation is weaker and crime is also slightly higher, even as the economy of London as a whole continues to grow. Andrew Crine reports.
West Croydon, bustling, ethnically diverse, a bit rough around the edges. This is Zone 5, but maybe looks and feels more like the inner city. Now, back in the 1980s, when I was at school, my geography teacher explained how London worked like this. So there was a centre of the city, which was where the West End and Buckingham Palace, all of that sort of stuff was. Then there was the inner city, which was run down, post-industrial, had high crime rates and all the rest of it. But outside of that, there was the suburbs, leafy, green, where people lived. But according to a new report out this week, all of that is now out of date. According to the Smith Institute think tank, there are now 1.2 million people in outer London who live in poverty according to the government's preferred measure. That's compared to just 1 million in inner London. In the Central shopping centre in Croydon, the charity Lives Not Knives, which helps young people and tries to tackle problems around violence.
I've visited a classroom before where a young boy said he's seen his dad be shot in the head in front of him. So, and that's just one story. There are multiple stories. It's a huge change from when I was young anyway. And now I know of people that actually are finding it quite hard living in the north of the borough, and they're finding it, they feel quite threatened.
According to that Smith Institute report again, economic growth in London has been incredibly uneven, with 500,000 jobs created in inner London in the last decade we have figures for, compared to just 8,000 in outer London. There is economic growth in Croydon, but according to local MP Gavin Barwell, not enough.
In many ways, outer London now has equal problems to inner London. I think the whole distinction is now a false one. There's still some real pockets of deprivation in inner London, but there also is in outer London as well, and we don't see the same level of public investment going into our outer London boroughs. So I think there are a number of urgent things that we need to look at to address what this report has found.
Fortunes, of course, do change. This is Bermondsey in the 1980s. And this is Bermondsey Street today, the type of place where, if you're so inclined, it's very easy to spend £4.50 on a loaf of sourdough bread. Now, in the last 15 years, the bit of Bermondsey where I'm standing has been completely transformed, as some would have it, gentrified. Now, of course, the same is true of lots of the parts of London which, not that long ago, were deemed the most frightening and dangerous places to be. So, for example, King's Cross, Brixton, Hackney, Peckham, and so on. They're also some of the parts of the UK with the strongest vote to remain in the European Union. According to the Smith Institute's Paul Hunter, the author of the report, there is a link.
Places in inner London have seen growth and renaissance, whereas in places in the outer London have perhaps not had such a good time over the last 10 or 20 years. So it's that comparison with how it was and how it now is.
The only London boroughs to have voted to leave the EU were all on the outskirts of the city, suggesting that at least to some extent, people in the suburbs have been less content with the direction the city's been travelling in.
Well, we'll speak again to Paul and Dawn in a moment, but first, Sean Bailey is a London Assembly member. He was also Youth and Crime Advisor to David Cameron. Sean, welcome to the Sunday Politics. You've just moved from inner London to outer London. You've also read this report. Does it chime with your experience?
100%. I was in inner London. I was a Zone 2 for years, born and bred. I'm now in Zone 6, and I see higher levels of deprivation and, more importantly, less help. The help is not there. I think the inner London boroughs have a better story to tell about poverty, and that's affected who gets the money. Inner London boroughs regularly get better levels of funding from the government and more one-off funding. Out and outer boroughs, I think, is a real feeling we've been left to ourselves, definitely.
I should say you're a bit out of breath because you've had a bit of a journey in from Zone 6 this morning, and we're grateful for you persisting with that. But when you look at, for example, some of the figures that are in their report, over 10 years, job creation in inner London, 500,000 new jobs created. In outer London, in the same period, 8,000. Do you get a sense that it is because of a lack of economic growth and activity, or is it something different about the culture of outer London?
I think it's a lack of economic growth, and also as well, you have to look at the makeup of London, where it's becoming important. The outer boroughs are now absorbing a lot of the housing need, and that means shifting communities. So we are getting people who need more support to be employed, and we're not receiving that same support. Also as well, if you look at policy, so the mayor has this ULEZ, which is ultra low emissions. That's been spread. It's the proposal to spread it all across London, but that will punish the outer boroughs. We don't have the same poor air quality, but we will be paying the premium, and that forces business not to take people on it, pay for the ULEZ or pay for staff. So the choices there mean that we don't employ people.
So what would be your answer to this? I mean, the report talks about creating a suburban task force, but I mean, that's just a mechanism to deliver changes. What would be the changes, do you think?
The suburban task force already exists. It's called local councils.
Yep.
The bottom line is we need to change the settlement that councils get from government. There needs to be slightly better weighting to favour the outer boroughs.
This is what Gavin Barwell was talking about.
Exactly, because that's where the real energy is to get something done and where the real pain is felt. Also as well, I think the mayor can not be an inner London mayor. There's an argument that all four of the mayors so far have been inner London mayors because that's where you all are, the media, that's where the excitement is. But actually the work is to be done in the outer boroughs, particularly as we are about to absorb a lot of the housing need.
Let me bring in Paul and Dawn at this point. I mean, let's be honest about this. London has been hugely successful in economic terms. The rest of the country will not tolerate more resources being diverted from them into London. So London has to do it itself. Would you buy the argument, the one that Gavin Barwell is making and Sean is echoing, that there needs to be some kind of a rebalancing of the resources in London between the inner London boroughs and outer London?
Yeah. So,
Go on, Paul.
well, I think, yeah, absolutely, because I think, as Gavin said, the division between inner London and outer London is starting to cloud. You know, Sutton does not look like the same as it did 20 years ago. That's not a bad thing, and but it's just a very different place to when I moved there 28 odd years ago. And also, I think to just treat outer London as a ring, as a donut, is a mistake, because Sutton is not the same as Brent, is not the same as Havering, is not the same as Barnet, and those. So you do need to look at each outer London borough separately and find those.
But this could cost your constituency, Brent, couldn't it? If that kind of thing happened, where, for example, the extra money that inner London boroughs get to contribute to pay for teachers, for example, were to be reduced. I mean, your council tax is lower than inner London than it is in outer London on average. I mean, those kinds of things will hurt people.
Well, no, I think what we need to look at is opportunities and mobilities around London, so inner and outer London. Once we look at those and make sure it's fair and equitable, then everybody will benefit. It's not about making the pie smaller, it's about making it bigger so that everybody benefits from it. And I think we'd see that...
What about just sharing around the existing pie more fairly?
And sharing it around, I agree. I mean, the government has made such savage cuts to local authorities, especially those in outer London and inner London London, Brent is actually outer London. It's the government that are making these savage cuts. So the blame has to fall on this Conservative government's
I would
door.
slightly disagree.
And can
the
I
whole,
say,
the whole,
can I finish?
The whole country's having to absorb those cuts. It isn't just
well, no. That's where you're wrong. The percentage, the government say, right, I'm going to make a 10% cut. A 10% cut in outer London authorities has a greater effect than a 10% cut on authorities that don't use as much money. So in percentage terms, it might be the same, but actually that's smoke and mirrors. So the effectiveness of how much money is essentially
it effectively
lost.
comes down to...
No.
There's no argument. There's no
more.
argument here if the government's making cuts. That's a fact. There's no argument here. We're in a time where those cuts have been accepted, they're happening. The bottom line is that inner London boroughs get more money. That's it. It's not particularly technical. You need to share some money to the outer boroughs so that we can support London as a whole.
Well, at least we've got some consensus on that.
Yeah.
Sean,
Always.
thanks very much for coming in. And out of breath, you staggered through, and we're very grateful to you. We'll be back in just a moment after we look to the rest of the news as it affects us in London in 60 seconds.
London Mayor Sadiq Khan has said he is concerned that a new generation of Londoners are hearing racially offensive terms for the first time. Following the EU referendum result, the number of hate crimes reported to the Met Police increased from between 25 to 50 a day to a peak of 88. The RMT Rail Union has offered to suspend industrial action over Southern Rail plans to introduce more driver-only trains, with conductors no longer operating doors. The union said it would not call further action for 3 months if Southern Rail also suspended its proposals for a similar period. A patient lay dead for up to 4.5 hours undetected at one of the busiest A&E departments in the country, inspectors have revealed. A review of North Middlesex University Hospital also found there were too few competent doctors who were able to assess and treat patients at night.
Dawn, is this rise in hate crime that we've seen, do you think, just a spasm? Will it fade again?
Obviously, I hope it does fade, but I think it needs to be tackled. I think we need to tackle... A lot of it was underlying, so there was a lot of underlying kind of discrimination and racial hatred and also misunderstanding of issues. And I think we have to tackle that so that it's not just papered over easily.
Paul, the RMT Southern Railway dispute continues at the moment. Which side, if either of them, do you think can claim the moral high ground in this?
Well, frankly, I don't think either. I think that RMT, I welcome the fact that they say they're not going to, they would call off further action. I want them to go further, though. I want them to speak to the people that are taking extra sick days off. There are extraordinary amount of sickness, and it's effectively unofficial action. And until we can get rid of that, we can't solve the problem about the driver-operated only trains. And that, at the moment, is exacerbating. It's failing us being able to tackle the underlying poor performance of Southern. We need to get rid of this union issue and then start to tackle Southern for the poor performance.
And it's poor performance the argument that Labour uses to say we should renationalise the railway?
No, I just think, frankly, we need to get to the point when we can have a different franchise holder, but we can't strip them out.
It can be run for not-for-profit. It could be brought in and sort of renationalised and run as a not-for-profit and be more efficient and effective than it currently is.
What I think we've agreed on, that Transport for London are actually going to look after the franchise in a few years' time.
Paul Scully, Dawn Butler, thank you both very much.